Hello and welcome to Responsible Government Contracting. This workshop is part one of a three-part series introducing government contracting. Today, Mr. Andy Bennett will discuss steps necessary to register to do business with the government. Thank you, and find us on the web at nc-rgc.com.
We're partnering with Andy Bennett, one of our favorite facilitators. He is going to be presenting an event on government acquisitions. Please enjoy, and thank you for joining us.
Hi guys, nice to meet you guys. I'm going to keep my chat window open just for administrivia here. So if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or if you'd like to stay muted, just put your questions in the chat and I will have that open and monitored. Today, like she said, we're going to be focusing on government contracting, government acquisition. So make sure you've had your coffee. We're going to do a high level overview of what it means to work with the government, how to structure yourself and your company in order to be most effective when you're working with the government, and kind of do an overview of what the structure is and how to kind of understand who the different people are that you're going to be talking to when you go through this process. Very, very kind of detailed, nuanced world. So we're not going to do all things for all people, but I do break this down into three parts. So you're on part one today, which is the registration piece. Like I said, we're going to talk, kind of a high level and kind of set the stage. Part two, we're going to go into the researching function. How do you find these opportunities? What should you look for? What agencies should you look for? And then part three is actually how to respond, how to propose, how to do your pricing, how to kind of position yourself as best you can to win and actually get funding from these contracts. I'm going to speak to you guys as if you're, business owners. I don't know your backgrounds, don't know your current situations, but I'm going to speak to you as if I'm speaking to small business owners. So just take that as a flavor. I respect that small business owners are very, very busy. I'm one myself. And you want that actionable, kind of very practical information. So I'm going to kind of set aside the, big stuff and focus on things that are actually practical here. So like I said, today, our objective, we're going to talk about the registration part, the overview from the federal government perspective. These pictures are from a recent family trip that I went on, and we went up the East Coast and with my wife and our kids, and we saw Philadelphia, we saw Colonial Williamsburg, Jamestown, all of the historical type stuff. I get a kick out of this stuff, and one thing that I noticed that I like to kind of bring up, because I know it's on everybody's mind. Andy, we really see that the budget there is big. We're talking trillions and trillions of dollars, big numbers, but there's so much of this going around, and so much of those things that we see on the paper, on the desks in there. And we actually went to the National Archives, and I just had to I had to pick one of these up, and it's authentic government red tape, and I just got a kick out of that because we don't really understand how complicated this world is until you kind of get into it. So come at this with patience and understanding that this is going to take a minute. It's its own world, it's its own language. But as you start to be exposed to some of these terms that the government folks are using, you will find that they use the same words. So if you're talking to someone over on this, on the Army side, they're going to use the same type terminology that, these people over here in Department of Education or National Institutes for Health or NASA, any of these different folks. So that kind of ties it all together. So there is benefit from, starting to go through that process. So let's kind of peel back that, government onion, if you will, and really focus on, really kind of define what it is we're talking about. and I actually pulled some more current information here. So let me see if I can pull that up real quick, just so we have the relevant current data, because the government changes their budget pretty frequently. Every year you'll see, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, but that fiscal year when the government's really going through their budget cycle, we're actually doing that right now. So when you hear in the news about the continuing resolutions or the budget fights or anything like this, this is what they're talking about, and it's frustrating for several, I know, and I respect that, but understand that that's the process, and that's where we get this kind of consternation from sometimes. So with that, let's go through some of these budget numbers and what we're actually talking about. So the three structures, and as we all kind of learned in school, are the legislative branch, the judicial branch, and the executive branch. And those are great to hear about, but doesn't really mean anything from a practical standpoint. So what do I care about those when I'm just trying to get some funding for my small business? Well, the congressmen, like I said, they're the ones that go around during the year and try and figure out, what types of programs they want to, fund. But that's really where we end. We're not talking about lobbying, because if you're talking about lobbying, you're not typically at the small business level. You have to have lots and lots of money to do that and to spend your time on that. So what we're talking about is once Congress signs that budget and they shift over, we're talking about that middle section there. The executive branch, headed by the president, and they're really setting the tone of how that money's spent. Congress says, here are the big, broad buckets of money that you can work on. Here's how much I want you to spend in, space shuttle development. Here's how much I want you to spend in, on the Army. But those are the big programs. How the money is actually spent at a boots on the ground level, that's up to the executive branch. So I'll say chain of command a lot. And what I mean by that is, the person in charge is at the top of the chain of command, and then they have people that report to them and then on down. So that chain of command that spends the money, that executes the budget, that's all in the executive branch, and they all work for the president. So those are really the folks that we're talking about. And if we look at it from what are the actual agencies that are spending the money, in orange and red, there's Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid. So a good portion of the big federal budget is spent on entitlements, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, that kind of stuff. This third of the budget over here, this is really what we're talking about for our acquisitions budget. So these guys over here are the ones that are spending the money. These are the contracts that we're going to be looking for and pursuing. Like I said, that budget fluctuates. This was last year's fiscal, their budget for previously. What we're looking at now is closer to $6 or $7 trillion. So that increases every year over year. But those things over here are called NAICS codes. And the way we track as a government, we track how we spend our money is on these NAICS codes. And you'll hear me talk a lot about these. And these are North American industry classification systems. This is just one of those things that you kind of have to start to commit to memory. I'll pronounce it as NAICS or NIACS. So NAICS codes define, okay, are you in manufacturing? Are you in professional services? Are you a dentist? Are you a dog groomer, right? So those NAICS codes, there are 1,300 of them, and they define what type of industry you're in and how we spend our money. if you look at the cycle of how we spend our money, and I kind of mentioned this before, that fiscal year, the federal not physical, fiscal year, that's the cycle from October 1st every single year through September 30th of the following year. That's the spending year for the government. So why we are hearing about budgets and continuing resolutions and all this kind of stuff in the news now is because October is when that budget was supposed to start. And Congress is working through that to have a budget for October through September of 2024. It's a little weird because right now, if I look at the calendar, it's December of 2023, but we are actually in fiscal year 2024 because 2024 fiscal year started on October 1st of 23 and goes through September 30th of 24. Now, why is that important? Why is that a big deal? Because here's the practical part. When we are talking to contracting officers, when we are talking to end users that I'll define here in a second, we are talking to these government folks, we have to know where we sit in that fiscal cycle. Because a contracting officer is not going to take your phone call, your first time phone call on September 29th, because they have other things to do. They have more pressing concerns on September 29th than to get an introduction to a brand new small business. They are trying to spend their money. I'm going to go into this a little bit more in detail. For now, you can see for lots and lots of years, right? So this goes back to 2000, and you can see these blips every single year for each of these agencies, and you can see the cycle that they're on. It's a very predictable cycle. Every year in September, everybody goes crazy. Usually July, August, September, that's busy season when government folks are trying to spend like crazy to make sure that they don't have any money left over at the end of the year. That's crazy bonkers. I know, I appreciate that, but that's how it is. And we'll talk about that more in a little bit. I just want to kind of expose you to that early on. This out here was an outlier for COVID. That is just one of those blips on the map, as you can see. Now let's get into a little bit of the fun part. I like to call them the legs of the table. So the four legs of the table are the actual human beings, actual people that you're going to be talking to and interacting with as you go through this process. This is not one size fits all. This is a way to organize and kind of think about the folks that you're talking to, because they repeat themselves over and over and over again. And I just kind of find it, informative to look at it from that perspective. So first up, we get the, we'll have a little fun here. We get the finance folks. So these folks do not make decisions. These are not decision makers. The finance people are going to help you get your bills paid. Super critical, which is why I talked about them at the top here, because every single contract that I've ever seen, there's a finance person that's listed on the contract in the weeds of the contract, and it says their name, their phone number, their email address, and the instructions to actually to do your invoicing. One of the biggest concerns that I hear from small business owners when talking about federal contracting or government contracting in general. Andy, love it, did some work years ago, but it was such a pain in the neck to get paid, right? Cash is king, cash flow is critical. I can't sit on, accounts receivable aging for, 100+ days. I need to get paid. I need to get cash flow. And the government's just not doing it. They're not paying their bills. That I always say time out. Let's kind of think about that a second. The government has to pay their bills. It's law. It's called the Prompt Payment Act. It's federal law. Trust me on this. Go look it up. Another factor, we've got somebody waiting in the waiting room. Another factor that is in that same law is advance payment or accelerated payments for small businesses. If you are a small business doing work with the federal government, you can request accelerated payment. And if you're a business person, you'll understand what I'm talking about here. The default for all government contracts is net 30. So you submit your invoice, then they have 30 days to pay that invoice. As a small business, you shoot an email to your contracting officer and request accelerated payment, and you get net 10 terms, because you're a small business. That's the only requirement. You're a small business. Okay. How do you go through that red tape, that process of invoicing? Imagine, if you will, you run QuickBooks for your company. I use QuickBooks for my company. And, I have a CPA, I do my invoicing on time, I track my bills, I do my payments, all that kind of stuff, payroll, all those things. Make sure taxes, all of those normal business functions. Now imagine if you're running QuickBooks for a $7 trillion organization. It gets kind of complicated. Well, if you're running that QuickBooks for a $7 trillion organization, it's going to get lots and lots of details going on, lots of different aspects and perspectives and details going on. So that QuickBooks for the federal government are multiple systems, white arrow workflow, IPP. There's lots of different systems that the government uses to do their invoicing. Every single time, I've been doing this for 20 plus years. Every single time a client has a contract and it's time for that first invoice, I'm calling this person with the client. Even though I think I know, I'm going to humble myself and say, ma'am, sir, I'd love your perspective. Just want to confirm these are the accurants, these are the sins, these are the CLIN numbers. These are all of the accounting details that you're expecting to see from us so that we input our invoice correctly. Because like I said, that business owner that complained about not getting paid by the government 9 times out of 10 did not submit their invoice like the government people told them to. These people, the finance people, are there to help you. That's their role. That's their job. They're not going to decide the winners and the losers on the contract, but they're going to help you get your invoices paid quickly. The next folks are the boss. I'm going to call them the commander. In commercial world, this is going to be the president or the CEO of the company. Now I'm in Tampa. So in Tampa, we have, this thing we call Gasparilla. So I'm wearing, a Navy hat here, even though I'm an Air Force guy. The commander is whoever that person, man or woman, person in charge of that local office. And remember, big government. So the person in charge of the big government is the president, but we're breaking it down to local offices. Okay, so Secretary of Defense is the commander for the Department of Defense, but they're not the person, the commander in charge of the local FEMA office or the Army Corps of Engineers Jacksonville branch, or whatever that local office is that you're targeting, you're working with. This is the person that's in charge of that local office, that local organization. Unlike the president or CEO of their commercial counterparts, the commander does not have signature authority. They do not have decision-making authority for their organization. There's only one person on this slide here that has that authority, and we'll get to them later. What the commander does is they provide influence. They provide broad direction. All right, folks, this is where we're going to be a year from now. These are the things that I want you to focus on over the next 12 months. These are the types of programs that they're getting from their chain of command that they're going to be targeting, that they're going to be focusing on. All right, so broad, in the military, they call this mission type orders, broad kind of direction, not very specific. These are the types of things that we're going to be doing. Commander, okay? influencer, not a decision maker. They are talking, and these people are taking notes and frantically writing down stuff. The end user, different title, would be mission partner or program manager, project manager. That flavor of operational person is what I'm going to call the end user. So the boss, the commander, is talking about the direction that they want the organization to go. The end user is the one that's responsible to break that direction up into little projects and then go do those little projects. Okay, so these are more practically minded, they're subject matter experts. These are folks that you're going to start targeting in your sales. Okay, if you are an IT, if you resell computers, these are the people that are going to care about the monitor size or the processing speed of the computer. If you're in manufacturing, these are the folks that are going to care if you have an ISO certification. They're going to care if you have a 5-axis machine versus a 3-axis machine. These are the folks, these are the subject matter experts in their field that are going to care about those specifications and those details. If you are in one of those type industries where you are focused on specifications when details matter, if not so much pricing, not so much worried about pricing with these guys, but really those certifications, the manufacturing type certifications, the specifications of the product, qualifications of the engineers. Again, if you're in IT, if you have, CCIEs or CCNAs or different credentials, certifications like that, these are the folks that you want to make sure know that. That's this type of conversation. Why does that matter? Why are you talking to these guys about that? Because their job is to write down the need statement that I need, right? That needs statement is what starts the scope of work or the statement of work or the performance work statement. That document is what the competition later is going to be based on. So if you're talking to these folks on an ongoing basis, on a regular basis, I'm going to tell you when you have to stop talking to them, but before anything happens, you're allowed to talk to these guys. And when you're talking to them about those types of specifications, they may not know that there's this, super duper pen out there that writes upside down. Now, they're not going to write down, they're not going to put in their requirement that they need to buy Andy's pens, right? They need, and they absolutely must have Andy's pens. No. The way they're going to put that as a requirement is they're going to say, I need pens that write upside down. If you sell laptops and you represent Dell, and Dell's laptops have a 15-inch monitor, but HP's laptops only have a 14-inch monitor. Well, you're talking about that difference and saying, ma'am, sir, end user, it's such a great thing that, our product has a 15-inch monitor, and here's why. Here's all the wonderful things that you can do with a 15-inch monitor that you can't do with a 14-inch monitor. And if they like that, it's their decision. But if they like that, then they can say, okay, great. They're going to make that as a requirement in that solicitation, in that performance work statement, in that scope of work. They're not going to say they need Andy's laptops. They're not going to say they need Dell laptops. They're going to say they need laptops with a 15-inch monitor or greater. Okay, so they're going to take that requirement, that salient detail, that point. Okay, so if you're in that type of industry, those are the folks that you want to make sure get that information. Next up, saving the best for last. I guess that's perspective here. All right, so the contracting officer here, they're the ones, and I said with the commander earlier that they do not have signature authority or decision-making authority. The contracting officer is the one who has that authority. They're the only ones that can obligate or commit the federal government. Let me say that again. The contracting officers are the only ones that can commit or obligate the federal government. These folks are interested in risk. They're not folks that you would typically find at Las Vegas at the slots, right? They're not the ones that are big gamblers. They're very risk averse. They don't like risk. They are very process oriented. They like, very defined processes. They really, really like, and if there's one thing you take away from this workshop, they really, really like small businesses. Legally binding requirement that they must do a certain percentage, and we'll talk about that in a second. They must do work with small businesses every single year. So contracting officers are looking at those types of things. They want to know that you've done this type of work before. They want to know your experience doing this. They want to know how you're going to do the work so that they know that you have a plan. Sometimes if it's a large effort, they'll want to see that you have financial backing to make sure you can carry the cash flow. These are the folks that are going to make sure that, they go through those types of details. Again, if you're talking to contracting officers, you want to make sure you talk about your small business certifications, your partners, your scalability, your past performances, your capabilities. This is not a world where you have to be all things to all people. This is not a world where maybe in the commercial sector, you have to be, the one-stop shop and your company has to do everything. Contracting officers really, really like to see partnerships. They love prime sub where there's, a large, maybe a small company as the prime and a large company as the subcontractor, and they work in tandem. The contracting officer is going to see that as, okay, that's a less risky bet. I can get this done and not worry if the small business is going to go out of business or not. So just understand who it is that you're talking to in the process and understand that their frame of reference is going to be different from person to person. Same thing said slightly differently. That process goes from the commander giving that broad direction, the end user taking the notes, writing down that requirement. Here's what it is that we actually need or require. The contracting officer is the center of the competition. They are going to be that firewall. Once that competition starts, don't talk to anybody else. The contracting officer is your point of contact, and all communications are going to be formal over email, ma'am, sir. You don't want to even have the perception of inside baseball here. That's called OCI, official conflict of interest. And a contracting officer will kick you out of competition and not even consider you if you try and go around them. So don't do that. And then that industry competition is going to go back and forth. They're going to do the requirements and go through that process. And we'll talk more about that later. Here is how some of the government folks teach themselves. So this slide is from Air Force Institute of Technology, and this is one of the training organizations in the military. They teach that process, and when the requirements are being defined, just so you see the government's turn, how they teach and how they learn this kind of stuff themselves. I think that's important to know, or at least to have seen. They want to see that requirement is like the 16 or the 15-inch monitor versus the 14-inch monitor. Is it actually something that's required? Does it come from the need statement? So those kinds of details matter for them. All right. Moving on to the small business thing I mentioned. Again, very, very important. Not really something that the end user is going to care about, but very much of interest to the contracting officer. Totally free, folks. Totally free. You can do everything that I'm showing you on your own. Okay. You can go out to the small bit, you get your NICE code. We'll talk about that here in a second. Get your cage code, do all that stuff, and get your small business certifications. you have to actually have the certification. You can't just say that you're certified. Let's use women for an example. If you are female and you own 51% or more of your company and some other, requirements, you're a woman-owned business. Wonderful. The government contracting officer has to do 5% every single year, 5% of their budget with woman-owned small businesses. But you cannot just say, yep, I own, more than half of my company and I'm a woman, so I'm a woman-owned small business. You have to go through the Small Business Administration and do that certification. All right. So don't be self-certified. That's, wonderful, but actually get that certification so the contracting officer can use that and benefit from that. Okay. So I said 5%. The total budget for small businesses, if you are a small business, well, I'll show you where that definition is here in a second. If you are a small business, 23.7%, so just about a quarter of the federal budget has to be spent on small businesses, awarded to small businesses. That's a big, big number. I'm going to show you what that number is, but that's billions and billions of dollars. 5% has to be awarded to minority-owned companies. In this world, it's called 8A. I'm going to put that in the chat here so you guys are exposed, you know what the terminology is here. All right, so 8A in parentheses, it's from the Small Business Act. That's what is commonly referred to as the minority-owned program. Another 5% with women-owned small businesses, like I said, 3% with veteran-owned companies, and then 3% with hub zone, historically underutilized business zones. So those are the major categories. There's some other cats and dogs, but those are the primary categories. Total small business, minority-owned, woman-owned, veteran-owned, hub zone. Okay. Each of those categories helps you reduce competition. These are all things that that will help you kind of restrict and limit the people that are competing against you. And I'll talk about that more in the process flow here. So what does that actually mean? And how do I know if I'm a small business? Anybody want to take a guess? I like to play this game. What's the definition of a small business?
Under a certain dollar amount.
Okay. Is there a dollar amount?
I think it's under $800,000 or something like that.
Okay. Great. Anybody else have an idea? All right. Keith, I appreciate you jumping in there, and I'm going to show you guys what that definition is. So this is, I'm going to put this in the chat so you have it. This is the document that defines what a small business is. And there are 1,307 definitions of small business in the federal government. There's not just one. Sometimes they get 50 employees, sometimes they get 100 employees, sometimes it's 30 million, sometimes it's 15 million. There are many, many different definitions of what a small business is for federal government. This document that I just put in the chat is defined, they update it every 2 years. And it's defined by NAICS code. Again, that North American, here's what it looks like. That North American Industry Classification System. Let me spend a second on that and show you a site that I find helpful. This site, I'll put this in the chat as well. As you are figuring out what it is that you do, part of the registration step, again, that we're talking about today, and will be very, very helpful as we start to research opportunities, is finding out what your best NAICS code is. I like to use this site that I just put in the chat here. I just go up to NAICS search and I type in, I describe whatever my business is and play around with this. Try different words, figure out what it is that works for you. So if I'm a janitor, if I'm in janitorial services, I'm just going to type in janitor. I'm going to see, okay, it's going to spit out several results. As you'll find out, there's not one size fits all for the interpretation of that. So I typed in something as simple as janitor, and you'd think there'd be only one, but I get 4 different results here. That's going to play out later too. We're going to talk about this more. But for this one, let's just use this as my example. If I'm a janitor, I'm for sure using this one as at least one of my NAICS codes. So if I'm in janitorial services, I'm going to come to this handy dandy document, and I'm going to look for that number. I'm going to look for that NAICS code. So if I'm in janitorial services, I see, there's a couple different columns here. What's going on? So if I am in janitorial services and I want to make sure I am an actual small business, then I'm going to look at this column here, which says size standard in dollars, millions of dollars. And I'm going to look at this column here, which says number of employees. There's only going to be one number. It's not going to be both. It's only one column or the other. So if I'm in janitorial services, that's my NAICS code, and I get 22 million. What does that mean? For the past 5 years, you have to have a running average of less than $22 million in gross revenues. So your company has to have it less than $22 million on average for the previous 5 years, and then you are considered a small business. So if you qualify, then you are, this thing you don't have to register for. This is the one that you just are. If you meet that standard, then you just are a total small business. So you can check that box. Just to show you another one, let's look at one that is in the employee count. Let's just find a different one. You can see the dollar value. Some of them repeat, but a lot of them are different here. Whoops, zoom out. Okay, here's a couple here. All right, so you see how some of these, again, the 2 columns, you see how some of these, like if I resell computers, okay, my small business size standard, that's what this is, a small business size standard, is 150 employees. So as long as I have less than 150 employees, I am a small business. I am a total small business. If I am in research and development at biotech, then 1,000 employees is my size standard. Because it would not be fair to have a janitorial services company competing at the same level as an IT reseller. They're totally different markets. They're totally different types of business. So the government recognizes that, and they say, okay, well, we're going to make this, a small business for these guys, and we're going to make this a small business for these guys. So it's more equitable. It's more fair. All right. So that is what a small business is. Now, what does that mean from a dollars and cents standpoint? If we're talking about that total small business, the NAICS code, the total small business, then that in one fiscal year, just last fiscal year, $148 billion of contract dollars, real tangible dollars, was awarded to total small businesses. $148 billion. That's a lot of contracts. The categories, minority-owned companies were 19 billion, 24 billion for woman-owned small businesses, 30 billion for veteran-owned, 13 billion for hubs-owned. If you are an African-American woman, you may qualify for 3 of those categories. So you are going to be winning contracts in this number, in this budget, and those are separate from the ones that are in this budget, and those are separate from the ones that are in this budget. So you may win contracts in 3 different buckets, and they're not overlapping, because each contract can only be set aside or categorized under one of those categories. You as a company can have as many as you qualify for, as many of these certifications as you qualify for, but each competition is only under one category. All right, so just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. All right, let me go back to budgeting for a second and kind of hammer home how important this is and how crazy bonkers it is. This is nuts, out there, crazy. I get it. I understand. So set reality aside for a second and just kind of go on this journey with me. if you are three different government agencies, all right, government, let's say FEMA, Army, and, National Institutes of Health. And, a couple of years ago, you asked for $100 and you spent $80. You didn't spend your whole budget. These guys spent exactly what they were asking for, and these guys overspent. They overshot their budget. In commercial, in normal business, you and me, if I underspent, I still got the job done, but I saved 20%. I'm going to get a bonus at the end of the year, right? I'm going to go have a really good Christmas party and we're going to have fun because we had, extra profit at the end of the year. Unfortunately, the government doesn't see it that way. Taxpayer dollars do not equal profit for the government. So Congress, when they are authorizing next year's budget, this agency is going to ask for what they asked for last year. They're going to ask for that $100 again, but they're not going to get it because Congress is going to look at that and say, you apparently don't need $100. You apparently only need $80 to get your job done. So we're going to use that extra 20 somewhere else. All right. So they just lost power and control budget in government. These guys did exactly what they were supposed to, so they're going to get the same thing. They may get a little bit of a price adjustment up or down, but they're going to get exactly what they asked for. These guys did an outstanding job and benefit citizens so much so that they needed that extra funding, and they're going to get fired in the commercial world, but they're going to get attaboys and pats on the back for government guys. I have contracting officers attend these kind of workshops, and they laugh. They're like, Andy, you nailed it. This is not everything. Please take this. This is generalized so that you kind of understand that the government's different. But this is why I say the contracting officers are not going to pick up the phone on September 29th, because they are super focused on spending down their remaining budget. Here's a side story. I was an Air Force officer. And I learned this very, very early. I was on the end user side, right? So I wore one of these hats. I was in satellite communications airborne. So I learned very, very early on that the budget was going to end and run out at the end of September. And I made a note that my contracting people my buyers were running around at, July, August, September. Hey, do you need anything? Hey, do you need anything? So what I started doing is I would go out and do my wish list, my Christmas list in July, but I'd do it in like the springtime. And I would ask my troops, my office, what they needed. You need, monitors, you need laptops, you need extra equipment, you need safety gear. What is it that you need to do your job? I would go out and research and just go to Amazon. I would go to, websites. I would find what the thing was that I needed, how much it cost, and where specifically I could buy it from. And I would just keep that list readily available throughout the year. That was my wish list. Then when the contracting officers would come around frantically in July, August, September saying, hey, I've got an extra $100,000. Hey, I've got an extra $10,000. Do you need anything? Oh, yeah, sure. And I'd have my wish list ready to go. It made it easy for them to go out and spend the remaining dollars that they had, so they didn't have $20 left on their books, on their accounts at the end of the year. And they got to clear it, which meant that they got to keep their job next year. So understanding that process as a business owner, understand that when you're starting the relationship and you're starting to talk to and do the sales cycle with the end users, do it early enough where they have time to understand what it is that you're doing. That's why a lot of trade shows are happening in the late winter, early spring, because you are making those connections and selling your capabilities to the end users. Those end users then understand what those requirements are and advance those to their contracting officers. And the contracting officers they go through the process, the competition process. If it's under $250,000, $250,000, $250,000, that's called the simplified acquisition threshold. If that expected award, if the expected contract is under $250,000, then that has to be awarded to a small business. The contracting officers have to jump through lots of hoops if they try and award something like that to a large company. Use that. That's why those rules exist. Use that to your advantage. Make sure that you register as a small business. Make sure you have your NAICS code. Make sure you have that capability statement. We'll talk about these in part 2 and part 3. But make sure you are prepared to give them the information that they need at the time that they need it. These are why these rules exist. Understand what the rules are and understand what the process is so that you can insert yourself into that process. Okay, now let's talk a little bit more in the weeds, the nug work of how to actually do the registration, because that's what I promised you guys. And now that you have kind of a better understanding of what the government process is. This is a good website if you don't know who your Secretary of State is. Not the federal Secretary of State that goes over to foreign countries. We're talking your local Florida Secretary of State for the state of Florida, Secretary of State for the state of Nevada, for Delaware, for Texas, wherever you are. That's the site that you want to go to. This website is, you can go to it, pull down your state, and it'll take you directly to that Secretary of State's website. This is the only thing, pay attention, guys. This is the only thing that you have to pay for. This is the only step in this entire process that you have to pay for, is registering your company for that secretary, with that Secretary of State. For the state of Florida, it's like $125 per year, and you have to renew that registration annually. Different states are different amounts. I think Texas is like $200, but whatever that amount is, that's the only amount that you have to pay for. Okay. Register, do that Secretary of State. This is where you're going to define your company name, your address, the type of business you are. If you're a corporation or an LLC, you do your articles of organization, all that type of stuff. Make very, very sure, I'm going to save you some heartache here. Make very, very sure you keep note specifically of the, I have a company that I'm working with now that when they did the initial registration, they had, Corp, C-O-R-P, period, capital C, lowercase r, O-R-P, period, as part of their company name. I'm not going to tell you the company. But when they went to do their SAM registration, which is what I'm leading you up to, they left that part out. So that's been 2.5 months of back and forth because the registrations didn't match. These are databases that if they don't exactly match, it's going to be a lot of pain for you. Another note, pro tip here, make sure that you have a business account set up. I don't recommend using your personal account, but make sure you have a business account set up. You're going to need your bank account information, routing number, all that kind of stuff. Also make sure you have an address. They're cracking down on PO boxes, not going to fly. Don't use a PO box for your company. You're not going to be able to register it. They also do not, as of late, recently, they don't like accelerators, incubators, common workspace, shared workspaces, those types of things. You need to go to a FedEx or Kinko's or UPS store, whatever it is that's local to you and that's easy. Use your home address if you want to. That's up to you. You do not have to rent a brick and mortar storefront. You don't have to do that. But you have to have a suite number or a physical address that is your company's. Okay, not a common workspace. They don't like that co-working space concept. All right, so use that same address for all of these registrations. All right, so the first thing up is your state registration. The next thing is IRS. I hear this pretty interchangeably between TIN, tax ID number, and EIN, employer identification number. I'm not convinced. I've talked to tax people about it. I'm not convinced that there's really any difference between the two. It's one number that you get for free from the IRS. You get it one time for your company, one time. This is the website. Go to the website. You will get an SS4 same day. That happens very, very quickly once you put in all your registration. This is the first time that you have to have a NAICS code. Remember, we talked about the industry classification system. The IRS is going to want to know what type of business you're in. All right, so put that down. Again, make sure you use the very exact spacing, period, punctuation, uppercase, lowercase for your company and for the address. Next one is DUNS number. If you've been around this world for a little bit, you know that you used to have a DUNS number. You don't anymore. But we're in that transition phase where some contracting officers will still ask for your DUNS number. So you're kind of put in an awkward position. Hey, knucklehead, you don't have to have a DUNS number anymore. Well, you probably don't want to start out the relationship with that. So you can still go to Dun & Bradstreet and get a DUNS number for free. Understand, Dun & Bradstreet is a company. They are like Expirant or any of those credit reporting agencies, but their focus is on business. So they will do your credit reporting. Quickly, what changes for LLC? Oh, that's a great question. Can you address quickly whatever the change for LLCs will be in 2024? That's probably a tax question and a structure, like a legal question. The federal government does not care if you are a sole proprietor or an LLC, an S Corp, C Corp, or a corporation. So for these purposes, from acquisition standpoint, from a contracting standpoint, they don't care. They just want to know. All right, so you just have to register that. That's a tax question and a legal, like a liability question, and that is not my subject matter expertise. So I can't really advise you there. But great question. Okay, so the Dun & Bradstreet piece you don't have to have anymore. It's there if you want to do that. It is free if you want to do that, but it's not required anymore. What you do have to do, though, feels very, very intrusive. Just know that going into it. This site is it's actually secure.login.gov, and you can see the address right here. Secure.login.gov is a one-time setup, right? So create an account with this website. This is a government website, and they're gonna ask for a picture of your driver's license, your government issued ID, your social security number, all of this. It's normal. Just make sure you're on a site that looks like this, okay? Because you want to make sure you don't provide that information to somebody else. What this is going to do, and I'm going to show you the site in a second, but that's going to give you your credentialing to get to your username and password to get into the registration step. Then you're going to get into this site. I'm going to show you what that site looks like here. Don't go to this site until you are ready, until you've done all that other stuff, until you've got your address, until you've got your formation, your company registered with the Secretary of State. You've got your bank account information. All of that stuff is ready to go. You've got that all set. Awesome. You're ready to go. Then go to this website, and this is what the site looks like. There are very, very convincing sites out there that are very, very misleading. So I'm going to put the link in the chat here, and I'm going to show you what it actually looks like. This is the legit site. And you can always double check that by look at the address. You can see .gov for government.gov. You want to make sure you look on a site, you are looking at a site that looks like this. You do not have to pay for this. All right. And there are Apex accelerators and there are SBDCs that are local to you that can help you with this process, or just keep joining these workshops. And I'll keep walking you through it. What you're going to do is click on this sign in up here. I'm going to need my phone because just like a bank, when you do banking on your mobile, you have to do like a two-factor authentication. They have to text you a code or whatever. This is that. So I'm going to accept. I've already done that secure.login.gov thing. If you have not, then you're going to create an account, and it's going to take you through that process. Okay. But like I said, I have already done that. So my username and password is already saved here. So I'm going to sign in and use my credentialing for my authenticator app here. And for the next 60 seconds or so, that's my multi-factor authentication. So now I can go in and actually look at the website. And I know I'm signed in because it says up here, sign out. It's just kind of a, you know, a check to make sure you've done the right thing. I clicked on home, and now I can get started. Register your entity or get a unique entity ID, a UEI. The objective here is to get two things: a CAGE code, CAGE, and a UEI, unique entity ID. So you're going to go through that, get started, and it is very well. Read this stuff, give yourself a couple hours, have all of that information, your address, your registration, your tax ID number, all of those things, have it handy so that you can plug all this information in all at once and not have to go hunt. Because I will tell you that you can save progress. You can go through the process and actually save as you go, but sometimes it gets, you know, kind of muddled and you lose that, or it gets kind of disjointed. So I recommend block off an afternoon and sit down, go through this registration and go through it all at once. It's going to ask you a lot of questions, and that's normal. It's going to ask you about your NAICS codes. Know that you can update those later. It takes, you know, like 15 minutes once you go through the process. It's going to ask you if you're foreign owned, or if you're a US citizen, or if any other company has influence over you or anything like that, right? So those are the types of questions that you can expect. Read them, take a second, don't get click happy and go through it too fast. Just read them, make sure that you're, you know, answering accurately. You don't have to provide, like, if you, can you please share a link for security? Yes. If you don't know the answer, or you don't think you know the answer, that's fine. Just put down what you think is most appropriate, and then go through it. So let's do sign in. The request was for the secure site. So create an account. This is that here. That should take you there. All right. That's all I've got for today, guys. Next up is going to be research, where we're going to take the information that we've learned today and move forward to how do we actually find the opportunities? How do we look for the contracts? And then in part 3, we're going to talk about how to actually respond and start winning these contracts. Appreciate you guys' time today, and look forward to seeing you on part 2 and 3.
Thank you for your time today. We hope this workshop was instructive and informative. Please find additional accredited courses and other support services on our website at nc-rgc.com